Uh, Good evening. This is Michael Cunningham, and tonight's topic is Educide, the history and the evolution of the word Educide. Last summer, Rua Alusa gave a paper entitled Genocide of Education, a case study on the impact of invasion and conflict on education at Regent's College, London, UK. Alusa applied Educide to education as a result of the war in Iraq. Alusa explained that the word Educide was first used by the Pluto Press in November of 2009. Here they question whether the systematic killing of Iraqi academics and intellectual elite would constitute a case of Educide. However, today the meaning has changed completely. Today, Educide was first proposed to be used in a new and different format by myself, Michael Cunningham, in his thesis for his master's degree from AGBU Armenian Virtual College entitled United States Foreign Policy vis-a-vis Ottoman Empire, Turkey, Armenia and Armenian Genocide, 1915-1923, a critical analysis. Instead of applying Educide as killing academics, I created a new definition. Educide was rewriting of history or education. Hence, this created a genocide of history or education itself in a real theoretical sense. Here, historians, politicians, and the media have changed how we're taught, what we are taught, and why we are taught, and when we are taught. By changing these factors and controlling the process of history or the process of education, they are in effect creating Educide, the genocide of education. This is one of the basic principles of genocide and the reason why genocides continue today. A famous poem can easily demonstrate my conclusion when they first came forth by Pastor Martin Niemöller. They first came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. They came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. This poem perfectly explains how Educide works. We are taught that there are no links between certain acts and that the links behind the certain acts and all acts are independent. Without learning about the connectivity of the events, we are soon shown, much to our dismay, that the actions were accomplished and resulted in something that we never saw coming, Educide, the genocide of education. Tonight's guest is Kevin Cunningham. Kevin is currently working on his doctorate in education at Concordia University, Texas, specializing in American secondary school systems. Good evening, Kevin.
Hello, how are
Start
you?
out a little bit. Oh, I'm doing great. To start out a little bit about this topic, let me try to change the thing. We'll go like this. Well, hopefully. Okay. Okay. To start out, okay, sorry about that. I can't get the platforms right. Okay, try this one. Okay, this will be a little bit better, I guess. Okay, to start out, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, basically, I've been in education either as a student school or in like undergraduate, graduate school for a long. And a part of that is basically kind of finding yourself, going through this educational process and realizing that there was something not, and it was a mind like figuring out what was going on in the system, how come things just didn't seem right, like whatnot. And I grew up the summer. I never took one education class as an undergrad because I just going through, and I never wanted to be a part of it. At least that's what I thought.
Okay,
You know
now,
what they say.
yeah, you end up emulating people that you don't really necessarily thought of. Now, you mentioned something about experience. Explain to me a little bit about the self sculpture model.
Well, that's what my research is. Idea is that we need to teach people to become an autodidact. So is eventually going to be their own moral agent in the larger society.
Okay,
So
now,
that oh go ahead.
no, have you found this to hit a responsive chord in academia, or do you think a lot of people reject this outright and think that this is not necessarily what we should be studying? What have you found so
No,
far?
I think I've gotten some, or I should say, I received some backlash from people who think that this idea is to plant the educational system as we know it. People who think that will give me backlash, but people
Mhm.
who actually look at the education and they understand the process of education, I think they get the idea that teaching best they need to be to learn as an adult is a lot everything very cookie cutter, and this is step A, this is step 9 until they graduate.
Okay, now going along this same line here, and you heard earlier when we talked that I defined genocide or edgicide as a genocide of education. How does this fit into your research? Or what do you think when you heard that?
Well, when I heard that, I found it kind of interesting. One of my conclusions was side in terms of the humanities department. Uh, the universities are really best at least they were 60 to 70 years ago, was humanities were the lifeblood of the university. I mean, people went to educate, they went to engineering, they went to STEM, they went to mathematics to get the higher paying technical. But what drove the universities and what inspired people to actually go to school in the first, the sciences, I mean, the math, science, and then also having philosophies, your English, your history departments. And I think 60 to 70 years ago, those departments were the life, like having a really great philosophy department, a really great logic team are essential to get people to think critically,
Okay,
and
and
permanently killed um, in the departments now.
okay, now what got you in this academic stuff about American secondary, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now in the secondary school system.
Well, let's define terms. Like secondary school to me will be high school level, high school level. Primary school would be elementary school, and then anything post secondary, graduate, things like that. So, in the for the research into teaching secondary school is I was a high school teacher for 7 years, and I saw everything from in Texas we have it labeled by A's, so I've seen everything from a high, like a 5 large metropolitan type of school near army bases and Air Force bases, and down to small open enrollment public charter schools. And the thing about those 17 years of experience is I got to see the very beginning of No Child Left Behind, Obama's presidency, and then through Trump, and then now with Biden, the way we have it, and the different changes that you have from the top down approach.
Okay.
Another reason that's kind of hurting secondary education.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it benefits the student. Every time we get more change, it appears to benefit the adults or who's ever in power more than the students, wouldn't you say?
Say it empowers more so Pearson or testing, and I say that because 17 years testing has become so important, like making sure that we get the kids to pass the particular test, or they need to meet a certain standard, quote unquote. We never really ask the question, what's best for that individual or best learn.
Okay, now if you think about the definition of educide, and educide is a killing of education, would this be a perfect opportunity to actually kill off education by throttling it down and through teaching towards tests instead of teaching to think?
No, I think it's more of like a killing of education of the self. So a lot of the beginning part of my research was all about how people learned in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, 19th, and it was really done on your own, having to read, having to think knowledge, and going to a mentor who challenged you in writing and that about what your level of knowledge was, and then you would have to go back and have to think again on what to do for uh, what to do to answer the question.
Okay, now
And
that
so,
brings up a real good point. I know a little bit about some of your research and Thomas Jefferson and how the founding fathers, you know, obtained their education. My question is here: what conclusions reached about their education, and maybe talk a little bit about like John Adams. I think John Adams, uh, his one of his addresses, his senior address, is grades out to be one of the highest written papers, like grade 25 or 26 or something like that. Uh, Writing that's ever been written by a leader. And Daniel Boone in his 1783, I believe 1783 autobiography grades out to be graduate level. And Daniel Boone never went to school at all in his life. How did these people get such a great education if they didn't go to a school system?
well, the most common one would be Abraham Lincoln. He dropped out of school in the equivalent of the first grade, wrote a address on the back of a napkin while on the train to Gettysburg to give the address. The address before him, the speech was 2.5 hours long. Gets up there, he reads the two paragraphs, and in those two paragraphs, he encompassed the idea for that particular speech, but the soul of the nation. So people back in my opinion, people back in those days, you're taught for yourself. Like, okay, when you learn for yourself, you are the particular ideas that work best for you. And so you focus like a laser beam, and math and science and everything else kind of goes into that direction. With the assembly line approach that we have in education today, where you in pre-K, and then you keep on going down every little step of the way, eighth, so on. Every little grade is a step along the assembly line. We live how we learn. And so, in my opinion, you're not killing, say, you're killing the education of yourself. You're becoming standardized and not in.
Okay, now if you are your own boss, why is that important in education? And instead of being a follower of many people in the classroom, why would it be more important to empower each individual student for their own education?
Well, because each individual student, one day, you're going to be a moral agent in the larger society. And it's figured out a long time ago, and I think this is one of the greatest things about living in Western civilization. The individual is primary. It's the foundation, it's the building block of all of the laws and everything else based on the power of the individual. It's the government only exists through the consent of the governed. And so if you have a country full of people who do not have the ability to themselves and understand and think what works, how they can work best within the system, not going to have a system like this for very long.
Yeah, that's like the old Benjamin Franklin quote: "What kind of government you're going to have? A republic if we can keep it." Okay, what was the most interesting fact that you've learned so far, or facts that you learned so far from your research?
I think the most interesting fact was two of them. Part of my research is based on Jean Piaget's work on the development of constructivism and the stages of development. So it's interesting to see mental age is usually within step of, and so as you age physically, your mind is developed on you can deal with higher levels of abstraction. And so my theory, students from lower grades like primary school to school, that the higher they go in physical maturation, generally the levels of mental abstraction.
Okay. Now, is there anything
interesting? Oh,
is there anything you found out that really shocking in that same area? You know, you found it interesting, but you find anything like revolting or shocking or upsetting?
I think the biggest thing about that is not research, it's how the system is set up. Because the system in higher is so polarized that it's not even, for example, when you talk about politics on the spectrum department, you will never find a conservative speaker point of view from a professor. It's so rare, it's impossible. I mean,
Okay.
it's almost like finding a Bigfoot riding a U.
Okay. What are 5 biggest challenges facing high schools and middle schools today in the United States in our current system?
Well, I think some of the biggest challenges are this idea that we have, like, standardization is the only tool. Now, I don't mind standardized testing. I think it does a pretty good job, a general overall view of what's going on in the classroom and whatnot. Emphasis of saying that you have to meet a certain percentile or level because everyone else is at that level. That's the part that I have issue with.
Right.
Issue with the current system as it is.
Well, let me express it this way, maybe, or ask you a question and rephrase it. Back when I was in school, we normally took tests on how much we learned during that school year. So you're testing against yourself, which seems to be some sense. But if you're testing against people that you don't really know, against a 70 percentile or whatever, 9% of people made 70%. I don't think that's exactly the way we should go. Is that correct way of thinking or not?
I actually think questions do here. I think that the present system is becoming very, as in they look at people as a cog in the wheel, and they figure out of money and resources and time into it. I should get. I mean, that's great for machinery, that's great for electronic parts. So when it comes to a human being, that's not really great for how we develop and how we learn.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that, Dale. Is that if we put too much emphasis on the collective, but we're actually doing the individual, we're losing the value of the individual and gaining the collective, which is probably not really a good trade-off. How do you see the future of the secondary education system here if we don't change?
Well, I think we have a couple of choices. I think of it as there's one scenario that's kind of the dystopian scenario, and there's one that's more hopeful. If we stay our present, not very optimistic about our chances. But if we make a radical change, the optimism level would shoot up pretty high. But to go over the nightmare kind of scenario, I think in this cancel culture, they not have a dissenting opinion, and even worse, we think that has a question to our opinion or our sense of self or whatever. Personally, and if we keep going down that path, we're going to get to the point there will never be anyone who can have a dissenting opinion. And that to me is going to be the true death knell in not only education.
Yeah, if you think back about that, Socrates is probably one of the greatest, teachers as far as Socratic method, and that's based on questioning. And science is allegedly supposed to be on questioning. How do we so radically change to get rid of questioning? And now you have to just take the answers they give you. How'd that happen?
I think it's basically identity politics. It's this idea your identity is not separate from inherent issues. For example, in debate, there's a common practice of base debater, but you have the argument, and the lowest form of argument would be to say themselves is necessarily horrible or evil. It's like what they call the ad hominem to the man, and it's the lowest form of argument. So for logic and reasoning, you always want to argue the point that's being the appearance of the person or the person's identity or whatever, like the that's another thing that developed from Western tradition that was really getting actually really rapidly getting away from in term.
Okay, now this is kind of off the top question second, but you've had a lot of experience in both public schools and private charter schools. Which do you find more responsive when it comes to change, and which do you think could be more easily fixed?
I liken charter schools to like Macintosh used to be in the 80s, right before Steve Jobs left. It was kind of like they were the pirates, they were the ones who were the risk takers and whatnot. And I think of other districts here in Texas, but like in other places, large school districts. I think those are more like a type of mentality, if we're using like a computer analogy. And you have a very rigid, strict hierarchy for reporting duties and like a very large scale type of going to move really slow. And I think that slowness makes it to where it's almost with issues very quickly. That's the interesting thing about charter schools, is very fast. They can adapt to change very well.
And you think that's one of the reasons why they could have higher scores, or parents, pull kids out of that to that, because at least the assumption is that they're not as bureaucratic as the public schools. Is that?
Yes, there is the reason why I like the open enrollment charter school concept is the fact that and they can do a lot of things, and usually charter school, like Catholic schools, I would say 50 or 60 years ago, where they could take in 3 dimes, rub them all together, and then they can make a budget for the entire school year. You'll see what it's the amazing stuff they can do with little to no money, using the ingenuity of their people.
Right. Yeah. And then
So,
the money factor is tremendous when it comes to public schools, because the answer is always more money, and that's not necessarily always the answer. So I can appreciate what you said. Now, let's say, for example, you were in a position to where you could change a school or a school system. What would be the first 5 changes you would do?
ooh, that really is a tough one. I think to make the best change, you have to start with having an organizational sense. So
Mm-hmm.
everything has to be geared towards the individual. And like I was saying, with students get older, they can start to develop themselves more and more and more. So high school level, they can, in their freshman, their sophomore, their junior and senior years, taking more responsibility in terms of building themselves. That's why I call it sculptor model, because the teacher is a facilitator. They give the and they give these tools to the individual student, and they say, you are your own statue. In your mind, you have to visualize you want to become. And so what I'm here to do is I'm here to help you until the truth is revealed within your own statue. To do that, you can further refine it the rest of your life. Educational system today, the way the hierarchy is set up, you can't really do that kind of.
Okay.
There's
Along that
too much
line,
emphasis on standardization.
okay. Yeah, along that line, I know recently, this school year, you've obtained a different position in doing your research. How has this helped your research? And secondly, tell us a little bit about some of the benefits of having a stronger curriculum in the charter schools, and what you've been able to see close up.
Well, my original research thesis was trying to change the way undergraduate level in education departments. My original assumption was to inspire future teachers to learn in a way, and they could take that and help inspire other students down classes to do it, that you could start a revolution in education that way. But to graduate school since 2018, that kind of idea of starting like a trickle down effect with undergraduate programs down to the secondary schools isn't going to be as effective as the secondary schools. And so what I've done this past year in the open enrollment public charter school in West Texas, and I've been able to ideas district wide this entire year, and it's been pretty great getting teachers to look at teaching in a new way,
Mm-hmm.
and also tutors into the classroom as teachers.
Okay. And how's this proven or supported your research?
Really supported my research because it gives the opportunity to show that miles helping inspire people through Piaget's stages of development. Easier to prove that by showing that I've done this at the elementary level with low socioeconomic students. I've done this at junior high at the same. I've done this at a different junior high at the same level. I've done this and the same process exists throughout the entire. So that's really helped my research.
Well, good. Now, I have a question here. What do you think the current system has not already changed? I guess in debate it would be inherent barrier. What's stopping the current system from trying to right itself or right the ship? If you think the ship is sinking, how come?
I see what you're saying. Like, I think some of the problems is the way we have things set up. System in colleges right now for undergraduate students is set up in the old style onto the assembly line. I like that kind of assembly line said that we put kids on the assembly line in pre-K, go all the way down to high school, and the assembly line, they don't know how. So he used the idea of like making a kid into a product Ford, and once they get off the assembly line, they can't even drive off the show how to drive in the first place. They were too busy worried about putting on the steering wheel or put windshield wipers and whatnot.
Okay.
So I think that the inherent barrier is the fact that our system doesn't allow our kids to kind of explore how best they learn.
Yeah, and kids aren't really involved in their own education, and I think that's why we have a motivation factor now for sure. Okay, how do you think your research fits into the show's theme of Educide?
I gather about Educide is like you're saying about the death of education. To be honest, that assembly line approach really is the death knell of questioning on how best I should learn or how best I should do things and function. And so if you're never taught that, and all you are taught is I'm going to on the assembly line, I'm going to learn how to put the tires on my car. So I now have tires on this metaphorical car that's me going through the assembly line. I never really learn the important things about life. We never teach anything about how to do income tax in school. Anything about when it talks about history, we never really students to kind of explore interesting parts of history or thesis, different ideas.
Well,
we just say this happened at a certain time, and then this is what you need to know.
Right, and I feel like in that case, history's been rewritten many times, and people don't even know how it's been rewritten or how the story. And that's probably one of the best proofs for Educide is that if you can change the background and people start believing it, it becomes true to them.
Well, it's like Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels. If you tell a lie big enough, and to as many people as you possibly can, it becomes the truth.
Yeah, and that was actually written in the book called Propaganda by Edward Bernays, the son-in-law of Sigmund Freud. And he was, Joseph Goebbels was his biggest fan. It's really crazy. Okay, now, why is your research important, and how do you think it'll change how we look at education in the future?
Well, the best of the two scenarios I was talking about before, like the nightmare scenario we're doing right now, and go down this rabbit hole of cancel culture and not being opinion, very dystopian 1984 type of imagery. But I think the best would be to have a resurgence of a mentorship where the teacher is the mentor and they walk beside you, the leader, but they walk beside you as kind of like a guide. And you, and if you have a bunch of individuals who taught themselves how to think, how to interact with people and whatnot, then when they become adults, it's been their years and their college years from 18 to 24, kind of like how to do all these things. It's like in our society today, it seems like people almost take 5 to 8 years to figure out who they are, what they want to do, and all of this stuff in this time period in their life is they're taking it and they're kind of wasting it away. When in reality, businesses, they should be getting to careers, they should be, starting families. So we don't really allow that to happen.
Okay. What would you like to tell this audience that you haven't already said?
I think the most important part is really getting into learn in the universality of it. The biggest fact that persuasion is the one thing inherent in all human societies from an educational standpoint, and it's going to. And the problem in our society, our educational system, instead, rather, we don't really acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge it because one opinion, one voice, and we never really tell kids that there's other ideas. And if my research is there's others that are universal to the human experience about persuasion, and we can use it of students. And so as they get older, from like junior high to high, they can understand that some people will not always at heart, and you're going to have to take what they say with a grain of salt. You'll have to know that which is true and that which is not true. Lost that as an education department.
Yeah. Okay. Should universities have an education department, or should they just be? Is it really necessary for especially like undergraduates to actually take education courses, or do you think they're benefited by just taking more courses within the subject field that they're going to teach?
The funny thing is, the question really becomes: do they even have one now? If you're doing nothing but parroting the same thing over and over and thinking that you're not really learning how to teach people.
Right.
I mean,
well, I think
the greatest example.
Go ahead.
Oh, myself personally, and my greatest advantage that I ever had as a teacher's son, I grew up in the educational system. What ARDs were, I knew what lesson plans were, and all knew. I didn't want to be a part of it. I did not want to do all that because I knew all the stuff I had to go through. That you really are a teacher, and that's who you inherently are. You kind of go into it head first. I don't know about any of those, the politics behind education or logical stuff, and that was the greatest advantage that I ever had as a teacher, master, where I started in January of 2002. So not, but just having this inquisitive mind of saying, okay, what do you need to learn? And I would actually talk to the students and say, well, what do you find? Like, what's exciting to you? What are you interested in? And I would have students look at me and just go, Mister, no one's ever asked me that before. And I was like, I wonder why. And then I realized because the teachers are not there, they're not trained to really care of students. They're there to instruct. It's teacher say, student do. And then I was like, I don't want to teach like that. I don't do well with that. I found that a lot of other students didn't either. So to answer your question directly, education departments are training students, their students, the future teachers, inquisitive, and they're training them to figure out like how best to talk with them and not just at them. Then I think those are the ed to go into. But if you have like an inquisitive personality to teach, you can learn more on the job training and learning the skills than you could through the education department.
Okay. What is the best way that a teacher and their parents or guardians can know that they're actually receiving an excellent education?
That's an interesting question. Anyone can tell you you've received a great education, then like that's basically their opinion on. So if you really want to know how a student's doing, the student can demonstrate and show you knowledge and of true under the particular topic, and they can do it unprompted. They can speech, and they can know what's going on in the topic, and also they're confronted with an idea that might be contrary to their belief, but it's based on facts and evidence and reason. And if that student can and say, you know what, that's actually correct my idea. If a student can do that, then they've received a top quality. But right now, as it is now, you'll never see a student do that. No one has the audacity to tell another person that they could be wrong. Worse, no one has the humility to admit that they could be wrong.
Yeah, that becomes a major problem. And going back to your self sculpture model a second, what is it that you found fast? First of all, tell us a little bit about. I know you know quite a bit about Jordan Peterson. How do you propose some of his ideas into your research?
Well, I found Jordan Peterson interesting because as a professor of clinical psychology, taught at very many prestigious universities and whatnot, and he never had whatsoever until Bill C-16 in Canada popped out. You must use preferred pronouns, and it would be mandated by law. Before that, he never had any issues with any kind of credit from school. He always had excellent recommendations from different peers, from different professional organizations he was members of. When he said that he would not support a bill that mandated speech, just wouldn't do it. When he was they were trying to attempt to cancel him, he was able to handle himself in the question and answer sessions. Well, it really caught my attention because I saw this was not only a highly educated person who had a moral fortitude to believe in something so greatly, and on the intellectual level, that they would be willing to show, I guess, credibility to say that this mandate, no matter what you say, because this is morally unjust. You don't really see, just in my opinion, you don't really see that in the modern society, especially in modern
Okay. There's a gentleman I know you included in your research, Thomas Sowell. Explain to him a little bit about what makes him really important in today's educational world.
Well, he wrote in a book different. It's called Conflict Divisions, and he was saying that there's two different that are going on in society, where you have a constrained and an unconstrained. The unconstrained vision is kind of like Rousseau. Everyone man is found everywhere in chains, and if we could just find the perfect system, the best ever, and everything will be fixed, and cats and dogs will be no war, and everything else, like it'll be utopia. And there's always going to be some sort of opinion that people may not like, so on and so. Basically, you would have to have a system that forces people into compliance. The opposite point of view would be the constrained vision, and that's saying things. Government governs best when it governs from a box. Like, for example, in the United States, the Constitution is a very, very powerful, and if the government is inside those constitutional, it works out very, very well. The moment it steps outside of them, then that's when we descend into utter chaos. And those are the two different types. In terms of education, I think we have had way constrained. Anything can be, anything goes. If I is a butterfly, then I'm a butterfly, and you have to treat me like me as a butterfly, and that just doesn't make any sense. It's not very congruent. So Sowell's research is important because it gives my research of saying that you need to have constraints on education. You need limits to help focus you. Think of it like pruning a tree that don't necessarily pan out.
Right.
If you don't have that.
Now, on that same line, what is it that we as parents or concerned citizens in our school districts, what should we look for in a good school, or how can we hold schools accountable for trying to help the children of our community get an education? What should we be looking for?
I think the best thing to look for are, if you see a lot of buzzwords going through the processes and the communications that districts sent out and things like that. If you see, I would instantly run and find a different institution of learning. Some of those buzzwords would be, for example, critical race theory. This idea you cannot relate to an idea from a particular background that you belong to or you identify with is wrong. A lot of my research about persuasion comes from this universality that it doesn't matter if you're tall or you're short, if you're black or you're white, or you can be Swahilian, or you can have warriors from the South Pacific. It doesn't make a difference. We're all human beings, 7 factors, and we can use that in education to help persuade students to choose. I think if you go to a school where they care more about critical race, say that in order to be diverse, you have to accept this particular opinion, you're not diverse, well, that's not going to cut it. That's whenever you see things like that, that's to a different school.
Yeah, it actually goes right into the definition of Educide is because you're really stopping education by not allowing people to think or question, and you got to wonder
Yeah, it's like
why they're doing it.
it's like what they used to ancient Greeks used to say, the best disinfectant is sunlight. If you just put it out into the sunshine, the sun rays will kill it off. If you want to idea, put it out into the public, give it the idea, give it the creed, an intellectual idea, and have a debate and have a discussion. And if hold up to scrutiny, well, then we have to move on. That idea just doesn't work. And I think critical race theory, you don't really have the ability to question. You can that because some people will identify so much with it, saying that otherwise you're, and then insert other buzzwords like racist, sexist, big, so forth.
Yeah, I guess we've gone down to that part and trying to, like you mentioned before, ad hominem attacks. If we can't attack the logic of somebody, we're going to attack them with buzzwords, or we're going to attack that person, and that's not really what education should be all about. We should be able to have a debate or a discussion and comment and agree to disagree. There's nothing necessarily wrong with disagreement. Many uh, inventions have been started on people disagreeing over something to try to prove their point, and they would go out and discover something. If we all thought alike, it would be kind of strange, but it would be interesting. Now, as we approach the end of this hour that we set aside to talk, what is it that you have found in your several years of doing doctoral research uh, about yourself, and maybe about how you learn?
I will say this: in anyone who's been anyone who's been through any kind of doctoral research and numerous different examples of everything from the defense of your thesis to different just talking with your professors and whatnot. The phrase, but you're the expert, needs to be stricken from that process, because what I've learned is I've been told several times, but you don't understand. I want you to change things, but you're the expert. Wait a second, hold up. If I'm the expert, how come I'm having to change my arguments just on the whim of a teacher who said the way that sounds? And I was like, well, I'm presenting the argument. It's not have my logic and I have my reasoning, but now I have to change because it sounds, but no one said anything about the validity of my, no one said anything about the logic of it or how it does, or maybe it's just, I feel as though this happens, but you're still the story. You're still the expert in this research. I think that's one of the biggest things going through educational doctoral process.
Okay.
You're
Now,
not always.
when I first approached you to be our first guest on the show, why do you think that I wanted to have you first?
I guess you wanted a different opinion, to be honest.
Okay.
Like my research is basically trying to tell people that you don't big, huge apparatus of a school system in order to be highly educated. And if we want to train people on a large scale, we need to have an educational system. But the system that we have now worked great industrial era. If this was like the second industrial revolution, 23, the way we have education set up would be great, because we're basically the same mentality as getting them ready to work in a factory.
Yeah.
And factories, but in today's civilization, today's society, we're not set up for that. Age is now light years ahead in terms of technology.
Yeah, we're giving them a 19th century education, and we're going to be training people in the 22nd century with a 19th century education. We're not
Correct.
helping people out. You know, that's one of the things where I talk a little bit about Educide quite often. But I mean, this is one of the best ways to kill things. I notice even in my classrooms or classrooms I've been involved in, or actually some articles that came out. Motivation is a tremendous issue today. We have people that go to school, just walk around schools, and they never go into classrooms, or they'll never open a book, or they'll never do this, or never do that. And they're really hurting themselves. They realize they're hurting themselves, but they still go ahead and do it. Do you think that maybe? Go ahead.
Excuse me. The reasons why in my research.
Yeah.
In my research, the one I think is this idea that we need to have the kids make a choice, choose to learn, and that choice has to be along one of the seven. One of the first factors of persuasion I talk about in my research is commitment and consistency. Once you make a commitment to something, whether it be a sport, a religion, or a marriage, for example, any kind of like, be consistent with it. And that weighs heavily upon the creation as a part of yourself. And so if we have, as a system, if we can have our students make a conscious choice to choose to learn, then we can hold them to that choice. And a lot of or the lack thereof, it's because if I'm a student in the class and I don't have to choose to learn, I just have to be there, and I'm just until I can finally get out of here and go out to the real world. I don't just walk the halls, like you were saying before, and because I never had to make the choice. It was made for me. It was thrust upon me. And so I'm in this a whole bunch of things going on that don't really have anything to do to me. I didn't do this kind of stuff. I don't know what's going on. So why should I care? Say, okay, look, your life is in your hands. You have to make myself. I have to sculpt myself. And if that's all these other choices that were taken away from you, now they're put on you. And that gives the student a hell of a lot of intrinsic motivation to it from the inside. You don't have to worry about motivation from the outside.
Yeah, and I think that you got a very good point. You can mandate people to go to school, but you can't mandate them to learn. And and they are slowly pulling away from that. These mandates to keep people in school have not really helped out education. In fact,
No.
we need to have some educational changes, and it's getting worse in that respect. Well, I sure do appreciate your time today, Mr. Cunningham, and appreciate you spending some time talking about your research. And I feel like the people who watch this broadcast and people who watch the broadcast in the future will get a whole lot of information about that. One more quick question, because I work with a lot of people from Armenia and stuff. Why is learning about your heritage important?
In my research, when I'm talking about like sculpting yourself, visualize, I always think back to have the student to think of themselves in the big statue, the big slab of marble. Someone like Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, and you're sculpting away the stone, the marble, and they see in their head with their eyes, they see the statue already. They see the potential in themselves, and stripping away the inessentials until the truth is revealed. A part of it is understanding where you come from and who you are, and I think knowing about your heritage and knowing about your family and your tradition is a key step to learning that, to be able to pick up that chisel in pieces. So knowing where you come from is essential to are and where you're going to be as a person. Now, I wouldn't use
think
that
especially
as a limiting factor.
No,
go ahead.
No, I would say I think it's part of your education process, because if you know where you're from, you can kind of know where you're going. If you don't really know where you're from, it's very difficult to know where you're going, and that's where you kind of go aimlessly, rudderlessly, and let the current take you instead of you taking the current. I guess it would be the best way to explain.
I think also you shouldn't use your heritage as a limiting factor either, because you can different cultures and places and whatnot. And I think that if you know from, you can take some of the gloriousness of your family history and background with other people, and then they can do the same with you. And that's a good way to help you. You may not, you might have a different skin color, you may be taller, you may be old, still connect, because everyone, if you have a heritage that you're proud of, you can always connect.
Commonality is always a good deal. Whether in education or not, you can get common bonds there. It makes a big difference, because we're not all going to be the same age. We're not all going to be the same gender. We're not going to all think alike, but we do have commonality that is not really taught.
Talk about Armenia, like when you have common things that are like the diaspora of being forced from a genocide, and then having all the Armenians kind of dispersed all around the world, will connect with the Jewish population for having to do the same. And you can have to go through the same.
Chinese people have done the same thing too. Chinese people came across the Silk Road, married into different families, and presto changeo, 1,000 years later, you may not look Chinese, but you may have a rich Chinese heritage. This idea, you can see, because we don't have a strong education, that's kind of taken away from a lot, but doesn't make it not true. That's what I was trying to say. Well, I do want to thank.
Go ahead.
No,
I was just going to end. I was going to end with this last statement, that a lot of now is the fact that just because our skin color automatically doesn't make a great example is what's going on in South Africa right now with different farmers that had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years generations of white farmers. They're African. They're there by birth. They've had multiple generations of their family, and now all of a sudden they're being basically that's another. It's like their entire heritage is being taken away simply because many years ago had apartheid, and now in order to make up for that, we the other people. That on a moral stand ground, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and even from an educational standpoint, what's wrong is wrong no matter who does it. And we just replace the people around. It still should be wrong. You said that about moral issue, and a lot of times I was listening to a 1983 press conference with Ronald Reagan, and this person stood up and said that Ronald Reagan wanted to have prayer in school, and then he said, well, prayer in school is very common. We did, the First Amendment doesn't say separation of church and state. It just says the Congress will pass no law. So, because we've had bad education in the past, we have rights and stuff that we could be carelessly taken from us at any time because we decided that the power of certain people is more important than our Constitution. And that makes it really sad. I know you're real strong on the Second Amendment rights. There's no telling you we get somebody in the Supreme Court, the rules are wrong, rules away. All these rights could just go like that. So it's important to have good education. It's important to have trained people like yourself, be future leaders in education. We really appreciate the time today, Ms. Cunningham, and we will see you later. And thank you for watching.